Okay, now that we've dealt with the market revolution generally, with changes in agriculture, we need to focus on industrialization and urbanization. This is a major outcome of this time period. It's during the 1800s that we start to see America's biggest cities taking shape, and it's driven by a number of demographics coming in. But industrialization, we can kind of pinpoint the factory system as going back to a guy named Samuel Slater. He starts experimenting with containing all facets of production. He's a Rhode Island merchant. He wants to put all the facets of production for cotton into one place. And so what he's trying to do ultimately is streamline the process of production so that you can make a greater profit. You're not wasting time, you're producing more. It's all in line with this general thrust of the market revolution. Shortly after Slater's kind of idea of putting this factory assembly line system into place, a number of merchants from Massachusetts are going to start opening up mill towns in New England. Basically what they're doing is they're building cotton factories on the rivers of New England, and those rivers are going to power the machinery within the factory. And generally what they're focused on is cotton production. So really, you can read about the Waltham system and Lowell experiment in the PowerPoint in the textbook for this week, but we're going to focus a little bit on the Lowell mills. This is an interesting process of industrialization and an interesting process of urbanization for us to focus on. What you have happening here is ultimately they open up these mill towns, and textile production is generally something that was seen as the role of women within society. So what they're going to do is they start building these factories along the river, and they build a railroad right by them. And the idea is that they want raw cotton to come in from the south. You get this raw cotton shipment moving up. When it comes into one of these mill towns like Lowell, Massachusetts, then it will be unloaded from the train, and by the time that you're done running it through all of the factories in Lowell, Massachusetts, you're going to have a usable shirt like the ones we wear all the time. You'll have a cotton product that's done. So what it's meant to do is contain all facets of production into this single town in Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, the people who set up this economic scheme, they also realize that they want their workers to be very close to the factory. And so they start building lodging for them as well. So this is really what we call a factory town, and it's one unique process of urbanization. In Lowell, what you have happening is women start coming from rural areas all around the country and clustering into these factory towns in Massachusetts, in particular in Lowell, Massachusetts, where they set up this first experiment. And so what they're doing is they're coming there and working with this cotton in these factories all day long. Now, this is a unique process of urbanization because it's generally geared towards women, and they're all coming to this one area just to produce cotton. We're going to see a different type of industrialism and urbanization happening in the bigger cities of the East Coast. But these women are coming from very small rural areas, and it gives them a unique opportunity to interact with people they never would have met otherwise from different parts of the country. There's a much higher level of culture in these mill towns than there was in some small rural town wherever they might have come from. But there's a trade-off here. The conditions in these factories are atrocious. You're working about 13-hour days inside of these factories. It's dusty, it's hot, you're breathing in the byproduct of this cotton production. The windows and ventilation systems are not very good. And generally speaking, it's just horrible working conditions. And so what you're going to see is that the women in Lowell start to say, you know, this isn't working for us. This really isn't a great lifestyle to live. It's really hard work in these factories. And when they start to complain about it, it becomes very clear that the factory owners can easily get rid of one or two complainers. But what they can't do is get rid of their entire workforce at one time, otherwise production stops. And so in response to the way that the Lowell experiment is set up, we see the Lowell workers' strike in the early 1830s. These women actually bound together and they say, you can fire a few of us, but you can't fire all of us. And they go on strike and they bring the factories to a standstill, after which some of their demands for working conditions changing are going to be met. And so generally speaking, we can say that this is definitely the first instance of labor organization that we're seeing across the United States under this new economic setup of the market revolution. So, that sort of gives you an idea of what's happening in terms of the earliest attempts to urbanize and industrialize. But we have a totally different process going on in the big cities of the Northeast, places like New York, Boston, Providence, Philadelphia. These cities are undergoing a far more diverse economic industrialization process. They're not just producing cotton. It's not about just bring in cotton, ship out a shirt. They're producing everything: paint, chemicals, furniture, tools, instruments, you name it, it's being produced in these big cities. And they're using a combination of mechanized production, so big machines, steam-powered machines. Skilled artisans are still very much a thing in the big cities of the East Coast. And they're going to use low-skilled labor to run the machines for the mechanized portion of production. And so what you're seeing happening here is that this is going to draw a lot of people into the cities of the Northeast in the United States. The job opportunities are there. With mechanized production, you're taking out the need for a lot of skilled labor, but you do need a lot of labor. And so people are coming from all over the United States and clustering into these cities on the East Coast. Very quickly, almost overnight, you start to see what were once small walking cities turn into big urban metropolises. You're having lots of different people coming in, lots of different influences, a lot of culture, a lot of art are starting to emerge in these cities as well. But alongside this process of urbanization, you're seeing some very negative drawbacks coming as well. You start to see the emergence of crime, heavy pollution, prostitution. These are all major problems in the East Coast cities because you have millions of people working there, but you might only have 890,000 jobs available at any one time. And so you still have a lot of unemployed, a lot of homeless people. Poverty and homelessness is a huge problem in the 19th century cities in America. And this is really going to sort of drive a process in which the governments of these cities are going to have to start trying to address issues like prostitution, like petty crime and property theft, like armed robbery, like pollution, and trying to create green spaces, and so that people don't feel so confined to this sort of urban jungle. But it is important to understand this relationship. Without industrialization, that process of urbanization really doesn't take place in these East Coast cities. A good sort of example of this problem and the relationship between industrialization and urban problems like prostitution, we look at New York. In New York, they were very big in the textile industry, but up before the market revolution and industrialization, they generally specialized in making slave clothing. They'd take raw cotton from the South, turn it into some cheap rags, and send it back down to the South for resale. After the market revolution sort of takes shape, they abandon that, and clothing production becomes their number one industry. They're going to start making clothing for elites, really nice stuff that will rival what's being made in Paris and London. And so they become a city of high fashion during this time as well. And what you're tending to see as a result of this is what sort of cements New York as America's fashion capital. But you're also seeing a large number of young women coming into the city and a large number of working age males, unmarried usually, and that gives rise to this problem of prostitution. By 1850, prostitution was the second biggest industry in New York City behind textile production. So that shows you how big this problem has become. And that's going to force New York City to institutionalize the nation's first police force, a professional police force. And so you can see that a lot of these social changes are coming right alongside these economic changes that are happening during the time period. So that's my short spiel on industrialization and urbanization during the market revolution.